Alright, so here is the Sliver deck. So, this deck is pretty exciting in Modern. There was a copy that finished in the top 16 this past weekend at the SCG Open. It's kind of a fringe deck. It's not terribly popular, but it's got a reasonable amount of power to it once it gets going. So, the mana base is a little bit weird and fragile because we're playing so many different colors of Slivers. So we've got 8 lands that can produce any color for Slivers. 4 Cavernous Souls, 4 Sliver Hive. And both of these lands are extremely important. You always pretty much want at least one. And then the rest of the lands are swamps in order to turn it on Sedge Sliver. And then 4 Mutavaults as basically another Sliver. And that Mutavault works quite well with our Pump Slivers just to be able to make it bigger. It works well with all the Slivers, so it just makes sense to play 4 Mutavaults. But since our mana base is not the greatest, we've got 4 copies of Aether Vial, which allow us to put in Slivers that we wouldn't otherwise be able to cast, which is really important. And also 4 copies of Mana Weft Sliver to be able to make any color once we have either a way to vial Mana Weft Sliver out or a green source of mana. So we've got only one 1-drop Sliver, but it's a very important one. It's Gale Rider Sliver. So having flying is actually a big deal. And you always pretty much want a Gale Rider Sliver against any creature deck in the format. You just want Gale Rider Sliver. It can block opposing copies of Inkmoth Nexus or what have you. Or it's just a way to fly over decks with like cards like Kitchen Finks and Voice of Resurgence. You just go right over the top of them in the air, and Gale Rider Sliver helps make that happen. So there's essentially 8 2-mana Slivers that pump all Slivers by +1/+1, or 8 copies of 2-mana Slivers, I should say. 4 Sinew Slivers, and 4 Predatory Slivers. And this is basically the major incentive to be Slivers. You are able to make your Slivers arbitrarily large a lot of the time, and you can draw multiples of these and snowball them, and that works out very well. We've also got 4 copies of Diffusion Sliver as a way to make targeting our creatures with removal much more difficult, because all of a sudden our opponent is having to pay an additional 2. And once we get 2 of these in play, it's almost impossible to actually use a removal spell on any of our Slivers. So that's why I like just playing the full 4 copies of Diffusion Sliver, with Jeskai Control and decks like that being so popular right now. We already went over Mana Weft Sliver. And so we've got a couple one-ups here. 1 copy of Spellskite as a surprise card off Company, off Aether Vial, and then 1 Cautery Sliver. So there's actually a reasonable amount of 1 toughness creatures in the format. So Cautery Sliver being able to ping something like a Blighted Agent or something annoying is nice. It's a 1-of, so you're not going to draw it that often, but it's pretty good when you do draw it in certain matchups. And then we've got a couple life gain effects in the main deck in Darkheart Sliver. Just a bear that can allow you to gain some amount of life, put you out of burn range. And looking at our 3-mana Slivers, we've also got some more 1-ofs. We've got 1 copy of Frenetic Sliver. Similar to the idea behind Diffusion Sliver, it just makes your Slivers more difficult to kill. we've got one Necrotic Sliver to be able to get rid of annoying permanents that might be on the other side of the table. Cards like Ensnaring Bridge, for instance, are extremely difficult to actually deal with, so if we end up facing off against that card, we're really going to be relying on drawing Necrotic Sliver. And 4 copies of Sedge Sliver. This basically goes off of the fact of how good Sinew Sliver and Predatory Sliver are. This is essentially another sliver that gives your creatures +1/+1. And being able to regenerate a sliver is also relevant. So 4 Sedge Slivers. And then also 2 copies of Blur Sliver to be able to give our creatures haste and to make our draws a bit more explosive. We can also collect Company into, say, Blur Sliver plus another sliver. And a lot of times that's actually just enough to kill our opponent. So speaking of Collecting Company, you see 32 creatures in the deck, all of which are slivers, and all of which cost 3 or less. So that's why Collecting Company is so good in the deck. Even though there's not that many green sources and it's kind of hard to cast, when you do get to Collecting Company, it normally works out in this deck's favor. So this is the main deck. Moving on to the board, we've got some more slivers that are a bit more corner case. There's 4 Harmonic Slivers. This card can just win the game single-handedly against the decks it's good against, like, say, Boggles or Affinity. If you just have a Harmonic Sliver, all of a sudden you're constantly destroying your opponent's artifacts or enchantments, and that is just huge against certain decks. Another copy of Spellskite, which is really good against decks like Infact or various decks that are trying to target you with Lightning Bolt. A couple Relic of Progenitus against graveyard strategies. Decks like Dredge or Goryo's Vengeance are pretty good against this deck because we're pretty much basing our plan on all creatures. So sometimes we do need a way to interact with the opponent's graveyard. A couple more Fanatic Slivers against the removal-based strategies. We've got 2 copies of Dismember. Dismember is good against Infact, which is also kind of a tough matchup. We really want to be playing against other creature decks or mid-range style decks like Jund or Jeskai, stuff like that. Because we're very good at working against opposing removal. And so we want to have cards, we want to have our own removal spells in matchups where we're a little bit slower than them, like Infact or Affinity. So we've got 2 Dismembers here. We've got some more life gain against the aggressive matchups like Burn or Zoo. So Siphon Sliver, once you get in a big hit with life gain against those decks, the game just swings immediately in your favor to the point where it's almost unlosable at that point. Once Siphon Sliver hits the table, say you just get in for 5 or so with Slivers already on the battlefield, and that life total swing is just going to be the difference in the game a lot of the time. And then 1 bullet in Telekinetic Sliver, 1 4-mana Sliver. This card is pretty good in corner case situations. We can also tap opposing lands, so not only can we tap opposing creatures or artifacts or enchantments, we can also tap lands, any permanent with the card. So it ends up being pretty nice once you get a few slivers in play, and having Telekinetic Sliver in play, there are some decks you can completely lock out of the game with it. So there is 1 copy. This is the list that I've been working on recently, and it's pretty good. It's pretty straightforward. Just maximizing on our most important slivers, and then having a couple one-ofs here or there. The slivers that aren't quite as important, but there are spots where they can be quite nice. So, yeah, this is Slivers, and pretty excited to go to battle with it.